Good afternoon, everyone. I, Sadra Shanaz, Assistant Professor, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Integral University, Lucknow, would like to welcome you all in this session of our value-added course entitled Ancient History from the Purview of Civil Services Examination. I hope you all are taking advantage of this course. Topic for today's lecture in the value-added course: land revenue, economy, central and provincial administration of Gupta dynasty. The ancestry and early history of the Gupta family are little known and have naturally given rise to various speculations. Names ending in Gupta, such as Shivgupt, which occurs in a Satvahan inscription, are sometimes taken to suggest their ancestry, but these suggestions are rather far fetched. Different scholars also place the original home of the Guptas differently. Some would place it in North Bengal, some in Magadh and Bihar, and some in UP. On the basis of the following arguments, it may at the moment be suggested that the original core of the Gupta territory lay in eastern UP. Allahabad pillar inscription, the earliest inscription recording the achievements of an early Gupta ruler, Samudgupt, comes from this region. The nature of the coin hoards of the Guptas found in this region suggests this the description of early Gupta territories in the Puranas may point to this. It is possible that in the closing decades of the 3rd century AD, the Guptas were subordinates of a branch of the later Kushtanas ruling in northwestern India. However, literary and archaeological sources indicate that they became independent in the second decade of the 4th century AD. Inscriptions tell us that Sri Gupt was the first king and the Ghatotkaч was the next to follow him. Chandragupta first was the first independent king with the title Maharaja Dhiraj. After declaring his independence in Magad, he, with the help of a matrimonial alliance with the Lichvis, enlarged his kingdom. We know we know about this alliance from a special category of coins. These coins have Chandragupta and his queen Kumar Devi engraved on the obverse and a seated goddess on the reverse with a legend Lichvia. Lichvis. The coins were made of gold, and this fact, in addition to the fact that the Guptas followed the weight system of Kushan gold coins, suggests that the Guptas had in contact with the Kushana territories. There are no concrete evidence to determine the boundaries of Chandragupta's kingdom, but it is assumed that it covered parts of Bihar, UP, and Bengal. Chandragupta first is said to have also started a new era from 319 to 320 AD. It is not clear from any records that he started this era, which came to know known as Gupta Samvat or Gupta era. But since Chandragupta first is mentioned as a Maharaja Dhiraj, he is credited with the founding of the era. It was during the times of his son Samudgupta that the kingdom grew into an empire. After having made you familiar with an outline of the political history of Gupta period, we now take up certain other aspects of this period. There are a variety of sources which tells us about economic, social, administrative, and cultural aspects of this period. These sources of information are inscription written on different materials like copper plates, stone, clay seals, coins issued by rulers of different dynasties, material from excavation, contemporary literature, and accounts left by foreign travelers like Fahyan. The administration setup adopted by the Guptas, it will also deal with the economic activities of the Gupta period and with different source of state revenue. Administration under the Guptas. Gupta king did not interfere in the administration of those regions where the kings had accepted their suzerainty. However, this does not mean that the Guptas were ruling only through their feudatories. They had an elaborate administrative system which was in operation in areas which were directly controlled by them. The king remained the central figure of administration. However, there was a considerable change in the character of monarchy. We find that the Gupta monarchs adopted high sounding titles like Param Bhattarak, Param Dwait, Chakravarti, Parmeshwar, etc. For example, the Allahabad Prasasti of Samudgupta describe him as equal to the gods like Kuber, Varun, Indra, and Vama, who had no antagonist of equal power in the world. Like the king who has been given a divine status in the Smriti scriptures, the Gupta monarchs too came to be considered a divinity on earth. However, in the spirit of Smriti literature and that of Kalidas, we find Skandgupta in his Bhitri Pillars inscription eulogized as a person who subdued the earth and become merciful to the conquered people, but they became neither proud nor arrogant, though his glory was increasing day by day. His father Kumar Gupta followed the true path of religion. Such references to the monarchy indicate that, in spite of the supreme powers that vested in the king, he was ex- expected to follow a religious path and had certain duties. It was the king's duty to decide the policy of the state during war and peace. For instance, Samudgupta was prudent enough to reinstate the monarchs of Dakshinapath in their original kingdoms. It was considered a prime duty of the monarch to protect his countrymen from any invasion. The king was to lead to army in case of war. This is demonstrated through the campaigns of Samudgupta and Chandragupta II. The king was also expected to support the Brahmins, Sramans, and all others who needed protection. He was also supposed to venerate the learned and religious people and give them every possible help. As the supreme judge, he looked after administration of justice according to religious pers- precepts and existing customs. It was the duty of the king to appoint his central and provincial officers. The Prayag Prasasti as well as the Apratig type coins of Kumar Gupta first point to the appointment of successor to the throne by the reigning king. An important political development of this period was the continuity of various kings in their regions once they had accepted the suzerainty of the Gupta king, and the Gupta king would not interfere with the administration of such regions. Council for ministers and other officials. The Gupta inscriptions are not very clear about the hierarchy of ministers. However, there is no doubt that the king used to take control of his ministers and issue written instruction to the officials on all important matters. The minister's office was perhaps hereditary. For example, the Udaygiri inscription of the time of Chandragupta II informed us that Veer Sen Sabha, the minister for war and peace, was holding this office by inheritance. Though the supreme judicial powers were vested in the king, he was assisted by Mahadandanayak, Chief Justice. In the provinces, this work was entrusted on the Uparikas and in districts to Vishapatis. In village, the headman and the village elder used to decide the petty cases. The Chinese traveler Fahayan stated that capital punishment was not given at all. There were some other high officials, for example, the Mahapratihara was the chief of the palace guards. The Pratihara regulated ceremonies and granted the necessary permits for admission to the royal presence. There existed an espionage system as in earlier period. The land grant inscription often mentioned Dutakas who were associated with the task of implementing gifts when gifts of land were made to Brahmanas and others. The Guptas must have had a big army organization. At time of war, the king led his army, but ordinarily there was a minister called Sandhi Vigrahik, minister in charge of peace and war, who was held by a group of high officials. The official title Mahabaladhikrit occurs in many inscriptions. Officials like Pilupati, heads of elephant, Ashwapati, head of horses, Narpati, head of foot soldiers, possibly work under him. The army was paid in cash and its needs were well looked after by an officer in charge of stores called Rana Bhandara Garik. Amongst other duties, these officers was to look after the supply of offensive and defensive weapons such as battle axes, bows and arrows, spear pikes, swords, lances, javelins, etc. Land revenue was the main source of the state's income besides the fines. In Samudgupta's time, we hear of an officer Gopa Sramin, working as Akshpataladhikrik. His duty was to enter numerous matters in the accounts registers, recover royal dues from the sureties of servants to check embezzlement and recover fines for loss due to neglect or fraud. Another prominent high official was Pustapal, record keeper. It was his duty to make inquiries before recording any transaction. The Gupta kings maintain a regular department for the proper survey and measurement of land as well as for the collection of land revenue. Kamandak in the Niti Sar suggests that a king should take special care of his treasury, for the life of the state depends solely on it. Both Kalidas and the author of the Narad Smriti state that one sixth of the produce should be claimed as the royal revenue. Besides this, there was the uparikar, which was levied on cloth, oil, etc. When taken from one city to another, the organization of traders had to pay a certain commercial tax, sulk, the non-payment of which resulted in cancellation of the right to trade and a fine amounting to 8 times of the original sulk. The king had a right to forced labor, visthi, bali, and many other types of contributions. The king's income from royal lands and forests was considered as his personal income. Besides this, the king treasury had a right to treasures in the forms of coin hoards, jewels, or other valuable objects discovered from below the earth accidentally, digging of mines and manufacture of salt. The whole empire was divided into desas, rastras, or bhuktis. The inscription provide us with the names of certain bhuktis. In Bengal, we heir of Pundravardhan Bhukti, which corresponded to North Bengal. Tir Bhukti corresponded to North Bihar. The Bhuktis were governed by Uparikas, directly appointed by the king. In areas like Western Malwa, we find local rulers like Bandhu Varman ruling as subordinate to Kumar Gupta first. But Parandatta was appointed a governor in Saurashtra by Skandgut. The province or bhukti was again divided into districts or vishyas under an official card ayuktaka, and in other cases a vishayapati. His appointment was made by the provincial governor. Gupta inscription from Bengal show that the office adhikaran of the district head associated with itself representation from major local communities. The Nagar Sreshthi, head of the city merchants, Sarthvaha, Karma leader, Pratham Kulik, head of the artisan community, and Pratham Kayast, head of the Kayast community. Beside them were the Pustipalas officials whose work was to manage and keep records. The lowest unit of administration was the village. In village, there where there was a headman called Gram Pati or Gram Grama Adhyaksh. However, the Gupta inscription from North Bengal show that there were other units higher than the village. In some cases, we find references to Ashtkuladhikaran, different categories of village mentioned as Gramikas, Kutumbis, and Mahattaras, sent representative to these offices which on various occasions function above the level of the village. Beside agriculturists, there were certain other groups in the village who followed such professions as carpentry, spinning and weaving, pot making, oil extraction, goldsmithery, and husbandry. All these groups must have constituted local institutions or bodies which looked after the affairs of the village. The village disputes were also settled by these bodies with the help of Gram Vriddhas or village elders. Agriculture crops constituted the main resources which the society produced, and that the major part of the revenue of the state also came from agriculture. These of course does not mean that agriculture was the only occupation of the people or that people lived only in villages. There were other occupations like commerce and production of crafts, which had become specialized occupations and in which different social groups were engaged. This also means that in an earliest periods people lived in forests, in agrarian tracts, in towns and in cities. But certain changes had started taking place in the pattern of economic production and consequently in relation between different social groups. Let us begin with the pattern of agriculture production. The concern of the society with agriculture production is clear from the way various aspects associated with agriculture operations are mentioned in the sources of the Gupta period. Various types of land are mentioned in the inscription. Land under cultivation was usually called kshetra. Land does not under cultivation were variously called as khil, aprahat, extra, and inscription give the impression that uncultivated land was being regularly brought under cultivation. Classification of land according to soil. fertility, and the use to which it was put was not unknown. Different land measures were known in different regions, although one cannot be certain what exact measure was denoted by a term. In some areas, Nivartan was the term used for a measure of land, whereas in the inscription of Bengal, terms like Kulyawap and Dronwap are used. It is not possible to classify the regions precisely according to the crops grown, but all the major categories of crops, cereals like barley, wheat, and paddy, different variants of pulses, grams, and vegetables, as well as cash crops like cotton and sugarcane, were known long before the Gupta period and continued to the cultivated. Of course, you should not assume the crops like maize or vegetables like potatoes or tomatoes were known to the farmers of the Gupta period. The concern of the society with agriculture production is also reflected in the importance given to irrigation. In the earlier Sudarshan Reservoir Talag in Saurashtra in Gujarat, originally built in Maurya period. This reservoir was thoroughly repaired when it was extensively damaged in the time of Mahachatrap Rudradaman, middle of the 2nd century AD. It was again severely damaged in the time of Iskandgupta. Parandath, his newly appointed governor of Saurashtra, and Parandatta's son Chakrapalit undertook the repair of the reservoir this time. Another method for irrigation was to draw water from wells and supply the water to the fields through carefully prepared channels. A mechanism possibly known before the Gupta period was to tie a number of pots to a chain. The chain with the pots reached down to the water of a hull, and by making the chain and the pots rotate, it was ensured that the pots would continuously fill with water and empty it. This mechanism was known as Ghati Yantra, as Ghati was the name used for a pot. This type of mechanism also came to the known as Arghat in the Harsh Charit of Ban Bhatt, which was of course written in 7th century AD. There is a very charming description of how cultivated fields producing crops like sugar cane were being irrigated with the help of Ghati Yantra. In regions like Bengal, rainwater was collected in ponds and other types of reservoirs. In peninsular India, tank irrigation became gradually the norm. There were thus different systems of irrigation, and the role of the state was only marginal in providing irrigation facilities to farmers. The farmers, of course, depended mainly on rainfall, and the importance of rainfall is underlined not only in the arsas of Kautil but also in the text written in the Gupta period. The sources of Gupta period suggest that certain important changes were taking place in the agrarian society. The inscription from Bengal refer to sale of land by district level administration to individuals who bought them by paying cash and made gifts of purchased land to Brahmanas who were accepted to perform Vedic sacrifices or to Buddhist or Jain religious establishment. But land was not only purchased and gifted, the practice of gifting land to religious donees had become quite common by now. Even otherwise, Remuneration for serving rulers in different capacities was received in the form of land by officials of different categories. Of course, all this was not absolutely new, but by now the number of ruling families had vastly increased, and thus the number of persons who received land but did not cultivate themselves went on increasing. The virtues of giving land were highly praised, and those who took away gifted land were threatened with many evil consequences. All this led to the appearance in society of a class of people who enjoyed superior rights over land, and by virtue of these rights and by belonging to higher varnas had high economic and social status. Of course, land rights did not belong only to those who received land. The Gupta inscription refer to different types of village residents like Gramikas, Kutumbis, and Mahattaras who must have village landholders, and their participation in land transaction indicates that they, they too were important members of rural society. Compared with the recipients of land from the rulers and the influential categories of landowners in villages, the condition of ordinary cultivators may be considered to have been rather bad. It is believed by some historians that because of the practice of land grants, the peasants' population as a whole were reduced to a very low position in society. This is not entirely true. It was the ordinary cultivators, known by various terms such as Rishibala, Rakshak, or Kinaz, who had low economic and social status. Among the actual cultivators, there were those who filled the lands of others and received only a share of the produce. There were also slaves who worked on the fields of their masters. Even domestic female slaves were cruelly exploited, and a text like the Kam Sutra, which was probably written in the Gupta period, tell us how much hardship they had to go through at the hands of their masters. There were other reasons why the condition of the ordinary cultivators declined considerably. One was that in many areas the appearance of small kingdoms of new rulers and their official and section of people who did not take part in agriculture created great inequalities in society and imposed great burden on actual tillers of the soil. The number of taxes imposed by the state on the producers also increased in this period. Further, the practice of imposing vishti or unpaid labor was also in a push. Although we do not know for certain how much essential it was for agriculture production, all in all, the condition of the ordinary cultivator seems to have become worse than in the earlier periods. Crafts production covered a very wide range of items. There were items of ordinary domestic use like earthen pots, item of furniture, baskets, metal tools or domestic use, and so on. Simultaneously, a wide variety of luxury items, including jewelry made of gold, silver, and precious stones, objects made of ivory, fine cloths of cotton and silk, and other costly items had to be made available to the affluent sections of people. Some of these items were made available through trade, others were manufactured locally. Description of many luxury objects, of which no trace is generally found in archaeological excavations may be found in the literary text or inscription of the period. These sources also give us interesting hints regarding the status of different categories of craftsmen. For example, different varieties of silk cloth called chaum and pattvastra are mentioned in the text of this period. An inscription of 5th century from Mandsaur in western Malwa refers to a guild of silk weavers who had migrated from South Gujarat and had settled in the Malwa region. Texts like Amar Kosh and Vrihad Samhita, which are generally dated to this period, list many items, give their Sanskrit names, and also mention different categories of craftsmen who manufacture them. However, for an idea of the quantity and variety of objects manufactured in this period, one has to go through reports of what have been found at various archaeological sites. Many important sites like Takshila, Ahitchhatra, Mathura, Rajghat, Kausambi, and Patliputra in the Ganges Valley, and other sites in other geographical regions have yielded many craft products like earthenwares, terracottas, beads made of different stones, objects of glass, items made of metals, etc. It seems that in comparison with crafts production in the preceding Sakushan period, crafts production in the Gupta period suffered some setback. It has, however, not yet been possible to make a very satisfactory comparative study between these two periods from this angle. All items were not available at all places. The movement of items for trade from one place to another, therefore, continued as in the earlier periods. India had extensive trade links with Central, West, and Southeast Asia and with the Roman world in the preceding period, and trade routes connecting different regions within the country had been developing over centuries. That commercial activities continued in the Gupta period are evident. Like their Kushana producers, the Gupta rulers too minted coins of different types, and the gold coins of the Gupta rulers show excellent qualities of craftsmanship. The Guptas also issued coins in copper, silver, and lead. These coins were obviously used for purposes of commercial exchanges, and in some regions of the Gupta Empire at least, the merchants held a high position in society. For example, two types of representatives of merchants, the Nagar Sestri and the Sarthvaha, were associated with the administration of the district headquarters in North Bengal. The seals of the Gupta period, founded at Vaishali in North Bihar, suggest that the merchants constituted an important section of the population of the city of Vaishali. Literary texts of the period to show that in cities like Patliputra and Ujjaini, commercial activities were carried on briskly and people from different countries were present in them. Merchants were important communities also in these cities. There were organizations which facilitated the functioning of both craftsmen and traders. The ancient term which was generally used for these organizations was Sreni, and the state was expected to provide the guild's protection and to respect their customs and norms. Similarly, members of the Sreni were also expected to follow the norms of the organization. Otherwise, they were liable to punishment. The term Shreni is often interpreted as guild, but there are different interpretations of the term, and in terms of many details, we are still not quite sure what the Shrenis were really like. Although craft production and commercial activities were brisk in the Gupta period, there are 2 points we should especially remember. First pointed is there were many types of craftsmen and they were not all identical either in wealth nor in social status. For example, there was vast difference between goldsmith and his family, with a shop in a city like Ujjaini and family of basket makers in a village. This is reflected to some extent in the Dharma Shastras written by Brahmanas in this period. The Dharma Shastras assign different ranks to different groups of craftsmen. Although in their scheme the craftsmen and artisans held a status lower than that of the Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas. The Dharmashastras also suggest that each group of craftsmen formed a jati or caste. For example, the Kumbhakaras or potters formed one caste. The Suvarnakars or goldsmith formed another caste, and so on. Although the system of caste was not really so simple, generally, the trend among craftsmen was that person following one craft formed a jati or a caste. Second point is craft production and commercial activities perhaps started declining from the Gupta period onward in most regions, and according to some historians, this resulted in the decline of towns and cities and in greater dependence of society of agriculture production. After going through the various aspects of Gupta administration economy, we find that considerable changes had taken place when compared to the earlier periods. An important aspect related to kingship was the continuity of various kings in their regions once they had accepted the suzerainty of the Gupta king. There was considerable concern towards agriculture production, and this is reflected from the way irrigation not priority during this period. The practice of gifting land to religious donees had become quite common, and the Brahmanas exerted considerable influence over the king. There was differentiation amongst the cultivators, and compared to the rich, the condition of ordinary cultivators declined considerably. Similarly, the wealth and social status of different types of craftsmen also varied. Though commercial activities continued during this period, it appears that there was a decline in crafts production. The Varna system continued in society. However, various foreign ruling families were assimilated in the Varna system. At the same time, various groups were kept out of the Varna scheme and were considered untouchables. There was also a considerable decline in the position of women in society. Any question? No question. Okay, thank you.